Okay, so without further ado here, um, welcome to Do Tell Story Swap on the second Tuesday of February, which is the 13th. And I would like to welcome to the stage Beth, and I am going to, I believe, spotlight you. Spotlight.
Wow. It's always such a shock. It's so good to be here. Welcome to everybody. A little background. I'm telling you a story that I picked up. I'm working with a little bit with my husband's twin brother, who is a well-known ornithologist in his own right. And he is in transition with health issues and having to sell his house. And he had quite a collection of books, and what included with that was a very intriguing little book from the Olani tribal group, and a woman named Linda Yamani from the Monterey area, and now living near Berkeley, I guess. And over the years, she had collected some snippets that had been collected years and years before from the Smithsonian. So she put together a lovely tale with birds. And this is the story of when the world ended. Now, in the time so long ago, something happened to the world. And the oceans rose and rose and began to cover the land, filled the valleys, the hills were covered, and finally the water was so high that when Eagle was flying day and night, all he could see was the sameness. But he spied just over there something that looked like a bit of land. Indeed, it was the top of a tall mountain that had not yet been covered by the water. It felt so good to stop for a minute and rest. He sat back and thought about how the world was being destroyed. It made him cry out and sing and cry at the same time. He was there for maybe 2, 3 days when all of a sudden along came the small hummingbird. Uncle, uncle, here I am. And the hummingbird sat with the eagle, and together they both began to sing and to cry. When after another, maybe 2, 3 days had passed, they'd been alone, they heard a scream in the sky, and up above they looked, and there was Crow screaming his way across the sky. Eagle called out, Crow, Crow, come down and speak to me. Come down and be with us. Talk to me. And Crow came and joined. And now there were three. And it wasn't long after that, maybe 2 or 3 days, when they heard above Raven, who was flying with his magnificent wings. And Eagle called out to Raven, come talk to us, Raven, come down. And Raven joined the group. And then Eagle called out, Hawk, Hawk, come fly to me. Now, Eagle at that time was the captain in those days. And so Hawk immediately took the clue and came and joined. And now the five sat and thought and brainstormed how they might possibly help to dry out the world. Eagle thought, now, Hawk, you are so strong. Do you think that you could fly up and dive down through the waters and reach to the earth below? Hawk thought, I think I can, but I'll have to go very high and be able to dive as fast as I can with enough force to get down there. And so Hawk tried. Hawk flew up high, higher than it ever been flown, I think, before. And Hawk began the plunge down into the water, thinking, I hope I can endure this. He made it some way down, but it was deep. And he came up gasping, saying, it is deep, so deep. Who knows if this is possible? Well, Eagle thought and said, well, tomorrow you'll have to go higher and try again, but you must do something else. I want you to pluck a feather from the very middle of my head, the very middle feather. And so the next day came, and bright and early, Hawk did exactly that, plucked from Eagle's head one feather and began to fly up very high. And the feather grew longer and longer and longer. And Hawk was able to plunge down through that water and put the shaft of that feather, which was so long it punctured the earth below. And he came up sputtering and gasping. Eagle said, "Now we will see if that feather might change our weather and the world might dry again." And so they marked the side of the mountain to see the level of the water. They waited a couple of days and they noticed the water was going down very slowly, slowly, slowly at first, but then faster and faster and faster until it was going down like it was in a drain, and the world reappeared. Well, it had taken Eagle, who was the captain of all at that time, and Eagle's magic middle feather to make that happen. For who would know what the world would be like if Eagle had not saved that day? And that is from little snippets collected from the Alani tribe over the last 100 and some years. The end.
Great story.
That is wonderful. Thank you, Beth. Can I ask you to put in the chat Laura, her last name, so that people could find her stories?
I will. They were printed in 1995, so I'm not sure.
Wow.
A little paper book, and it comes from the a kind of a cultural center in Berkeley, the Oyate group. So I'll put down her name, and she should be, because she was born in 49, so she's certainly still around, probably still sharing.
Yeah,
will
it
put
would
in the
be
chat.
nice. Yeah, I'd love to hear her tell stories or just to see a book on the stories. That looks like a 1930s book. The
Well,
pictures.
it has some nice woodcuts in it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, I'll put that in the chat. Thank you.
lovely. And
That
thank
was,
you.
I had just actually picked this book up and found it today and thought, that is more intriguing. So
It
the
is.
three of us. So you'll probably hear another hummingbird story. Yep.
Are you a hummingbird fan?
Oh, yes. So
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Great.
Okay. Well, I'm going to let me see if I can figure out what I'm doing here. All right. Hold on. This can
Mhm.
happen. Bing. So, oh, what? Yeah, there it is. It's just me. All about me. Okay. So next, I'd like to welcome to the stage Laura, and let me just see if I can figure out how to add spotlight. No, now I want to get rid of me. Hold on. I'm sorry. I'm learning
We're
this.
almost there.
Yeah. Remove spotlight. Yes, you're
Whoa.
on, girlfriend.
Okay, okay. Hey, everybody. Good to see you. Well, I wanted to do a story that had something to do with love, since Valentine's Day is tomorrow, and there's all sorts of types of love. So, in a long ago land, far, far away, in a place where winter lasted almost all year long, the other seasons were just very, very short. Roddy and Rosalind were playmates, and they loved to play in the snow, make snow forts and snow angels, and throw snowballs at each other and snowmen. They had a grand time all through their childhood, and it wasn't a surprise that fondness that they had for each other gradually turned into love. And when they grew up, they got married. And they made for each other a very warm and cozy home. And they were really good neighbors too. They got usually a very nice harvest during the short summertime, and they kept their food stored in their cellar down deep in the ground. And they were very generous with anybody who was running low on any sort of supplies. And they just had one thing missing, and that was that they wanted to have a child. And every month they were hopeful, and then every month they were disappointed. And the months went on, and they turned into years. And with every gray hair and every wrinkle, their hearts grew heavier because they knew they were growing closer and closer to the time when they would no longer be able to have children at all. Now, some people in the village where they lived were very uncomfortable with this, and they didn't know what to say to them, so they just avoided them. They just couldn't handle it. Some other people were very judgmental, and they gossiped about them. They said there's something terribly wrong with that couple. They wouldn't have anything to do with them for another reason. But most people accepted them just the way they were, because they knew that misfortune hits us all at different times and different ways. And so they went on, and one day, Roddy was an old man, and he was visiting with a friend, had a great time swapping stories, drinking coffee, and he was heading home. And this wonderfully moist snow came down from the heavens. You know, the kind of snow that's just perfect for snowballs and making snowmen and snow forts and snow angels. It was that kind of snow. And as he was walking home, children were playing in it. And he just got so excited. He raced on home to Rosalind. And from the porch, he called out, "Rosalind, Rosalind, come on out and play with me like we used to do." And Rosalind was in the kitchen, and she was ready to start supper, but she thought, why not? She took off her apron, put on her coat and a hat, and out she went. And there was Roddy standing there, and he said, "Oh, Rosalind, let's make a snow child, a boy or girl, I don't care, just a snow child of our very own." And so they set to work, and they got very, very busy in the snow. And this was a very unusual sight. And people slowly gathered. And some of them thought, like, they must have lost their minds. What are these old people doing, like playing in the snow? What's going on? So this crowd gathered, and it wasn't long before this gorgeous snow girl took shape. She was perfect in every way. And then the last thing they needed to do was put in coals for her eyes. And so Roddy took one coal, Rosalind took the other. They put the eyes in. And the girl came to life. And she raced to Roddy and Rosalind, and she said, "Oh, Mommy, Daddy, thank you for bringing me here at long last. I've waited so long." And her voice was so melodious, they named her Melody. And after that, it was as though she'd always been there. She just fit right in, and she helped Rosalind around the house. She went ice fishing with Roddy. Anything anybody wanted help with, she was very happy to do it. And she played with the other children. They loved her. They had such a great time. But then, even in a land where winter lasts a long, long time, winter finally had to come to an end, and the days gradually grew warmer in spring, and she had to spend less and less time outside and stay out of the sun. And then spring quickly moved into summer, and she had to spend almost all of her time in the cellar, which was deep in the ground and very cool. But she was lonesome in that cellar. And on Midsummer's Eve, some of her playmates came to the door. They were so excited. "We're building a bonfire. Can Melody please come out and play with us? We're going to sing and dance. It's going to be so much fun. We really want her to come." And Roddy and Rosalind said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. It's just not possible. It's not safe. And summer will be over and fall will be over quickly. And Melody will be back out to play. You just have to wait." So they left and they headed toward the bonfire. But Melody had been listening, and she was so lonesome all by herself there. She snuck out, and she joined her friends at the bonfire. And it was so beautiful. Everyone singing and dancing. And she just got more and more energy and joy as she was there with her friends. And time just flew by. And then it wasn't long before that fire was very, very low, just a little bit of it left. And her friends started leaping over the flames. It looked like so much fun, but she held back because she wasn't sure she would have the energy to make it over the flames, even though they were very low by now. But one of her friends, two of her friends, each one took a hand and they got a good running start and they raced and they leaped over the fire. But then Melody's toe hit one of the flames and she disappeared. All that was left of her was a little bit of moisture on each friend's hand. And after that, Roddy and Rosalind were alone again. And once again, some people in the village were so uncomfortable with the sorrow of the whole thing, they couldn't talk to them. They avoided them. And other people said, oh, she was the mark of the devil anyway. It's just as well that she's gone. She should have never been here. But most people remembered her fondly. And Roddy and Rosalind, till the end of their days, when they reminisced, their hearts grew full. They were not heavy when they thought of their wonderful snow daughter who passed through their lives so briefly, but left an enduring mark of love.
Oh, that was so beautiful, Laura. Did you write that?
Well, it's a folktale, but I made my own version of it,
What was it, Scandinavian?
I believe so, yes.
The
Yeah.
reason I'm asking is your descriptions of snow and the wet snow and how perfect it is for playing. Did you grow up in snow country?
I did, yeah.
I could tell.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That is a beautiful story. I love the misfortune hits us all, which doesn't mean you shouldn't be happy. It means
Yeah.
you take both. Yeah, that's a
Thank
lovely story. Your descriptions and your timing were wonderful, as always.
Thank you.
So thank you. Okay, I'm still working on this, so hold on while I do, that goes here. Um, so this has been lovely. We're getting some really interesting different stories. And I believe Sharon is up next. And so I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to get rid of me. I'm sorry that this is new to me, but anyway. So welcome, Sharon, to the stage.
I'm fuzzy again. I don't know what causes that.
I don't know. That's weird. Were
I
you
know.
the whole
It doesn't
time?
do it unless I'm telling, so I don't know what to do about it.
Are you too close? No?
Doesn't
No.
seem to be any better if I'm a little bit better. Maybe it's that. All right, well, I will just tell and you will just not care that I'm fuzzy. All right, we go from the snow country to the hot country. The San Joaquin Valley in the summertime is hot. And in 1952, the year that I was 9 years old, it was sweltering. And I didn't care because I had plenty of good defenses against the heat. So in the morning, as soon as my chores were done, I went to settle myself in front of the old swamp cooler with my library books. And the cooler had a musty, kind of moldy smell, but I wasn't worried about a little mold because I was going to Hannibal, Missouri to visit Tom Sawyer. I was going to hang out with Joe March. I was having a great time. At 1 o'clock, when the public swimming pool opened, I was the first one at the gate with my quarter in my hand and a towel over my shoulder, and I was ready. When I got admitted, I spread my towel out on the cement and covered myself with baby oil so that I could help the sun along on my way to a perfect tan. But when the cement got too hot, I went to sit on the edge of the pool, and then I lowered myself inch by inch, slowly, slowly into that water. I know some people like to run and jump and get that shock over with in one blast, but I was a cautious person. And I knew, looking around me, that though there were dozens of kids in that pool doing who knows what, that the chlorine would keep that water sparkling clean and fresh for us. And I felt a little sorry for the blonde kids, though, because the chlorine interfered with their hair. And by this time, by July, the summer was half over, and some of those kids already had green hair. I didn't have that problem. I had to be home by 3 o'clock because my mother was taking me shoe shopping. Now, that's another thing. My mother was very adamant about sturdy tie-up shoes for growing feet. And there really is nothing quite as disheartening as sturdy shoes. And they had to have so much room at the front so you couldn't grow out of them. But the good thing about going to the shoe store was the big old x-ray machine they had there. And you could walk into it and look down through the viewfinder and see your own bones in fluorescent green, your toes and your feet. It was so modern and high tech. And then it turned out that they had exactly my size of sturdy shoes in the back. And on the way home, my mother felt sorry for me. So we stopped at the Purity grocery store, and she let me spend all of my allowance on candy cigarettes. Now, that was my favorite thing of all because I was practicing for adulthood. I could put that cigarette between my two fingers and wave it around and think that soon I would be a sophisticated and mysterious lady in a haze of. Well, by the time my dad got home from work, my sister and I were playing jacks on the sidewalk, and he rolled the window of the car down and said, "Does anybody want to go for a ride?" And we said, "Oh, yes, we do." Because we always begged to go with my dad when he went to the service station. Because while the attendant was putting in the gas, we could stick our heads out the window and smell that delicious gasoline smell. We could hardly wait for our chance to do that. But on the way back from the service station, my dad spotted a crop duster in the rearview mirror. So he zipped the car around and we rode all the way out of town to stand beside the field and watch our own personal air show as all the golden clouds of pesticide went back and forth. It was so beautiful. And then at the end of the day, the very last thing came my favorite part of all. Because just as the sun went down, the DDT truck turned onto our street. And oh, I love that. He rode so slowly that I could run fast enough to keep up with him and stay in that cloud of DDT the whole way. And so I ran all the way down the street until he turned the corner and was gone. So now I'm one of those old people who think the olden days were the good old days when life was simpler and healthier and I feel that way now. That was a wonderful summer.
Sharon, you brought back so many memories for me. I chased the DDT truck too. Yeah. No, why nobody stopped us, I don't know. I don't get that. But all your little details, I loved the green hair, the baby oil, the candy cigarettes. We had those, and you'd strut around on the sidewalk, you know. You have such a great eye for the perfect summer day as a kid.
It's a wonder we lived through all that.
It's a wonder we live to be as old as we do without glowing green. Yeah, truly amazing. Well, thank you so much. Okay, I am going to do, um, sorry, this does take me a second because I have to figure this out. Remove spotlight. Okay. So I thought we're sort of zipping right along. I thought what we'd do is have one more teller, which is Katie. And then we will take our break. And then when we come back, we'll have Vicky and Elaine. So is that okay with you, Katie? Okay. So what we're gonna do, and spotlight, is I would like to welcome Katie to the stage. Oh gosh, I'm sorry.
Don't apologize.
Take it away,
You're
Katie.
doing a wonderful job. I was so impressed. I have a Shirley Ann story for you tonight. Well, hello there. I'm Shirley Ann. Oh, I come from England, a tiny village. It's so tiny, it's hardly worth putting it on the map. Well, for the winter solstice, my friend Charlotte and I, we went in search of holly berries, and mistletoe. We wanted to decorate our homes for Christmas. Well, we didn't have any trouble finding the holly because it was in all the hedgerows, but there was no mistletoe. And so we walked across the fields into the woods, and we looked in all the trees, but there was no mistletoe. After a while, I smelled something. It was very strange. It was midwinter, but I could smell fresh apples. I said to Charlotte, Charlotte, do you smell fresh apples? She told me her nose was so frozen, she would never smell anything again. But I was like a truffle dog, not chasing truffles, but chasing the scent of apples. I left the path. I just raced off into the trees. Poor Charlotte, she had to run to catch up with me. We kept up this cracking pace for about 20 minutes till we came to a barbed wire fence. Oh, it stopped me in my tracks. I was looking for a private property, do not enter kind of sign. But Charlotte had looked up the fence and seen there was a break in the fence, and she just slipped on through. And so I followed her. As we walked through the woods, we looked up into the trees. High up in the branches, there was mistletoe, but it was too high for us to climb and get. We came to a clearing, and in the clearing was an ancient apple orchard. The trees were old and gnarled. The branches were bent and twisted. Well, the branches too were way down with mistletoe. And below the branches, there were apples. Well, lots of rotten ones, of course, but some were okay. Now, I have quite a reputation locally, of course, that I talk to trees. And so I asked the trees there, if we could harvest the mistletoe. But there was one particular tree that I called the mother tree. And I asked her if I could have 3 of her apples. And she very graciously said, yes, I could. You see, I'd been to a lecture, and it was all about collecting apples from ancient apple trees. And they were going to try and trace them back through history to the ancient apple orchards of the Isle of Avalon. where Glastonbury stands today. Well, after we collected the apples, we suddenly heard the church clock chime 3 times. 3 o'clock. Oh, I said, it's going to be dark in an hour. We thought we were miles from home, but then we recognized the church chime. It was from the church in the village, just 2 miles from our home. What a relief. We had come in a big circle. So we said goodbye to the trees. And I told the mother tree that I would return. I'd return at the beginning of February, because that is the Celtic festival of Imbolc, which is for early spring. And I told all the trees that I'd come back to celebrate every festival that was on the Celtic calendar. There are 8 in all. So we went home. And I told Len, my husband, of my plan, what I was going to do. Well, he wasn't happy with me going back by myself to the private property. Oh, I said, Len, don't worry. I'll take my driver's license, as a form of identification. And then as an afterthought, I said, oh, I think I might take my passport too. I wondered why I'd take my passport. I said, what if, Len, the aliens arrive, and they want to abduct me? I was going to whip out my passport, from my pocket and wave it at them. And I'll tell them I'm a loyal subject of Her Majesty, wait a minute, of His Majesty King Charles. And they weren't to touch me. So on February the 1st, there I was, back in the orchard with all the apple trees by myself. And I found a little patch of sunlight. There was no warmth in the sun, but I sat in that sunlight and I talked to the mother tree. We had a lovely conversation. Well, I'd finished my sandwich and I was reaching for my thermos of tea. I was about to pour myself a cup when I heard a woman's voice behind me. It was kind of sarcastic, Oh, I say, I presume that must be Shirley Ann. And she's talking to my apple trees in my orchard. I slowly turned around and I smiled at her. I'm sorry. I don't recognize your voice nor your face. She told me her name was Elizabeth Ann Smythe, and that she and her husband Peter, they were the new landowners. Oh, yes, Peter and I, we have great plans for the house. Oh, and of course for the land. Peter has done some research and he's almost 99% sure that there is buried treasure in the orchard. Yes, indeed. And he's going to get rid of all those silly trees and dig up the orchard and find the treasure beneath it. Ah. I looked at her. I thought, sweetheart, the only treasure there are the trees. But I didn't say anything. She did add that they were going to have to wait, for the summer to do this, when the land was drier. Now, I knew I had just a very short time before she ordered me off her land. And so I offered her a cup of tea. I think she was kind of surprised. As I handed it to her, I said, it's builder's tea. It has milk and sugar in it, but it's grand on a day like today. And builder's tea is very strong tea that she probably would never drink. Anyway, but with the tea, I gave her my last piece of Christmas cake. And so I could see she enjoyed that enormously. And we had a little chat. Well, I packed everything away in my backpack, ready to leave, when her phone rang. I could see she was delighted to receive this call. Oh, I say, this is frightfully important, and I must take it immediately. And she pointed a finger at me, as if by magic. she could hold me in my place. And then she turned her back on me. And that's when I disappeared. I did. It's a trick I've been working on for a number of years now. I said goodbye to the mother tree and the other trees. And I told them, oh, I slipped away. I told them I'd be back. I left the orchard both swiftly and silently, and I moved back into the woods amongst the trees. And I went home. And you know, the next Celtic festival, that's going to be in mid-March. That's the spring equinox, when I return. Oh, but that's a story for another time. Blessings, abundance, and healing to you all.
Oh, I do love Shirley Ann. I swear I could spend, a whole weekend with Shirley Ann, just listening to her rattling on, moving on, doing whatever she does. It's just, anyway, that was wonderful. It's a little bit of Masterpiece Theater, a little bit of Upstairs, Downstairs, a little bit of All Creatures Great and Small, a little bit of, yeah, I love, anyway, I see Shirley Ann in my mind's eye, and you really bring her to life. And yes, your not so good friend who owned the apple orchard. Yeah, that's called a, yeah, anyway, that's called a Bronx cheer. So
Thank you.
thank you so much. I'm so glad you told us that. Um, so you know what? I think we're early, but that's okay. How about if we take a 5-minute break, which means we come back at 7:40? And now this is where Brandon always says something about the bathrooms down the hall. But see, when I say it, it just sounds stupid. When he says it, it's hilarious. So I'm not going to say it, but that's what he would be saying if he was here. Anyway, so we will come back together at 7:40, and then we will do our prompt.
It's almost 7:40 now, so we'll be
I
coming
mean,
back.
7:45, duh. Sorry,
Okay.
7:45, 5 minutes. And then we will do our prompt and announcements, and we'll have more storytelling. So I'll see you in 5 minutes.
Okay.
If you pause it. Cool.
That would be smart, wouldn't it? Okay,
Have
hold on. I can do this.
Do you go up to recording and just press? Oh, you have to do it.
Oh, there it is. Recording. Oh dear. Recording. Stop recording. Okay, so we're gonna start back from our break, and I'm just going to call on each of you, and if you could just tell me in, a couple of words or so, a couple of sentences, where you get your stories from that you tell. And if you don't like telling stories, or you're not telling stories currently, where do your favorite stories come from? Which sort of is a segue from what we were just talking about oral tradition and all that. So I'm going to start with my screen, and that means Beth is number one. So introduce yourself and tell us where your stories come from.
Hi, I'm Beth Wakely, and I live in Sebastopol, and I was given a book long ago by my mother, Shirley Temple's storybook. And I've loved hearing them. And I guess just being at the festivals opened my eyes, some classes, and the stories I tell tend to be very youthful, either folk or legends. I have found that my own stories, that just doesn't work as for me, but sharing some of the some of the culture that's come before us, and just the fact that, how many thousands of Cinderella stories are there? So I have a collection of little snippets and stuff from over the many years, from 74. I've been teaching nursery school and sharing stories in classrooms for such a long time. So they just come from stuff that gets collected. No one source.
You know, just FYI, I've heard a new term called pocket stories, and that means a story of 3 minutes or less.
Aha.
So it's a term that people use. Yeah. So moving on, Elaine, where do your favorite stories come from?
Well, first, my name is Elaine Stanley, and I live in Santa Rosa. And my stories come from many sources, some from books that I've read, some I've heard and asked if I could retell in my own way. I like stories that speak to me. They usually pick me more than I pick them. They sing to my heart or to the psyche, or they leave you going, wow, at the end, or there's a story I tell about truth. What is truth? And you can walk up to somebody who is in the audience and say, so what is truth? And they say, oh, I have to think about that. I said, I've been thinking about it for a lifetime since I learned it. And I still haven't found it.
But that's where our stories come from, is what is truth.
That's right.
Yeah.
So they come from many sources, and I like stories that speak to me, that call me out. And that's why I don't think I've ever done a program of stories that was requested. Like, we want you to tell Christmas stories. We want you, because if they do that, I go, oh, what date was that storytelling? Oh, I'm sorry. I have other commitments, but I could recommend this wonderful storyteller, and I give them the names and contact numbers of other tellers, because I don't want to do the same story. I want variance all through the program.
I get that. Thank you.
Mhm.
So Meg, moving on, girlfriend.
Hi, I'm Meg Brown. I live in Forestville, and I come by storytelling through my family. As most of you guys know, my mom was a very good storyteller, and really, as a librarian, she did a lot of storytelling to a lot of people. But of course, she started with the family. And if you all remember, back in the day, we used to take Sunday drives before gasoline got to be so expensive. And we lived out in the middle of nowhere in Arizona, and those were usually long, meandering drives. And we didn't get the radio station very well, so they would, my mother and my father would both tell stories, and so we grew up on them and being told to them. And it was interesting because eventually in my work, I discovered that I was also a storyteller. That's how I would talk to my clients about, experiences and just how things connected and all of that. It was pretty much storytelling. Most recently, also, as you probably know, I've been working on family history through some letters and documents that were left to me by specifically my grandmother on my father's side. And so I found it one of the motivating things about going through at least 100 letters has to do with all the stories that I found in those letters. I've told a couple of them to you guys, and I continue to look for them and try to pull some of them together, because the time that my grandparents lived was very different from what it's like today. And it's just fascinating to me, the things, the adventures that they actually had. And much of it had to do with just their environment and their way of living and all of that. So I think stories come to me in a whole variety of ways. That's what's happening right now. But I know also that when I've gone to festivals, I've heard a story that, like Elaine says, just grabbed me. And I just, a lot of them are luckily in the public domain, so I can go ahead and tell them. but also other storytellers really do inspire me to remember stories and to enjoy them. So that's how it comes about for me.
Oh, it's lovely that it's a family tradition. And it was so
Mhm.
nice to have met your mom because I online, but not in person. But yes, to hear her stories.
Yeah, thank you.
So, Katie, you're next.
Hi, I'm Katie Mangan. I live in Santa Rosa. So, oh my gosh, where do I find my stories? Well, of course, the stories come to me. They're very earth-based, oriented. You know, weather has a huge effect on my stories. The colder, the wetter. That brings stories. I think going back to my childhood, you know, sometimes I was pretty lonely. And so then you become very imaginative and you tell stories to yourself. Um, and just sort of going on walks, seeing different birds. I think birds have a huge effect on me and which ones and how they are and if they're talking to me or not. So I guess in a way I live in a magical world and trying to sort of really bring it in and use that, yeah, for my stories. And I think music also helps. That's what I do.
It's wonderful because you managed to weave the magical with the real so
Mhm.
well, which a child's storytelling does.
Yeah.
You know, so thank you. Okay, Laura, you're next.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, I guess stories come to me too, or there are things that stick with me. Sometimes it'll be a whole story somebody will tell, or there'll be like this bare bones of something in a book that just really fascinates me. And I think, well, what could I do with this? Or just
Mm.
an image will stick with me. I mean, just thinking about the summer day that you described, there's memories that came back to me about where would I go with that sort of a story. Or thinking about my family, there was absolutely no storytelling tradition. It was completely repressed, completely the opposite. You know, just think about, well, where's a story I can pull out of that? You know, I don't, just so many things every minute of every day there's something going on that some of it sticks with me, some of it doesn't, but I think I get all sorts of ideas throughout the day, and then some of them really stick and I work on them.
Now, you are an author, am I not correct?
That's correct.
And
I've
so, how
published
do
7
you
books.
choose which stories you actually want to write down and which ones are telling stories?
Oh, that's interesting. um, The first book that I wrote was a memoir of my childhood, and I was actually very involved in storytelling at the time. And I realized this is not a story I could tell to a live audience. It is not that kind of story. And so that was something I realized, and that was my first book.
Mm.
Um, I think I'm just now getting back into storytelling after a long time of focusing more on writing. And I think maybe telling a story, working on a story to tell usually will be if I have a reason to do it. You know, like the swap. Okay, I want to tell this swap. It's good for me. It's good for my health. It's fun. It's sharing. It's so beautiful. There's nothing like it, right? So there's a purpose there. Uh, that's what'll drive me. I need to probably put myself. My granddaughter's school asked me to tell every now and then, so I have to, you know, I agree. Okay, I'll do it. I'll prepare stories, you know. But I'm trying to get to the place where I develop a repertoire that stays with me, you know, that will, so I'll be ready if a situation arises, but I'm not there, if that makes any sense.
It does.
Yeah, yeah.
It does. We all have our own pathways.
Yes.
Okay, Gay. Oh, you're muted.
Actually, I haven't told stories here, but but very honestly, I've told stories all my life. When I was putting my brothers and sisters to bed, to sleep, instead of having the light on where you'd read from a book, it was easier for them to go to bed with just listening to me talk. And I did that with my kids when they were growing up too. So I'd read books to them also, but it was my stories would be the ones that would work with the dark, so I could get them to sleep. But I haven't. They're just totally out of my imagination. They're not constructed the way you people do it, But I've enjoyed the different forms of stories that are being shared here. And there's not one right way to do it. Yeah.
Well, please, if you would like to tell a story, we're all ears.
Yeah, I hope to get to the point where I could put it into a format that can be shared like this. Because the way I would do it would just be ad lib, and they're totally, my stories don't have their imagination outlandish things would just happen. I'd have to shape it to do it with this group. But I love storytelling, as you can tell. I'm a big fan of everybody here.
Well, we're glad you're here. And to your point, there's all kinds of storytelling, including 3-minute pocket stories, or people just tell a vignette, and it isn't a plot. It's just like 2 or 3 minutes of an image. So
yeah, thank you.
Whatever works.
Thank you.
So Vina.
Well, I think I love Story Swap. One of the reasons two reasons I love it. One of them is because we get reality stories, which Sharon, you often tell, that really ring for me. But the other is the imagination that many of you have. Katie, several of you can tell a cohesive story that your imagination has supplied you with. So if I do tell stories, it's out of my life. It's something that really happened. To illustrate something to one of the kids, or in my writers group, I'm telling little short stories of things that happened in my life. And they're good stories, but in a very dead, sober, realistic way. So I do love the mix that you guys provide.
Well, somebody one time said, after hearing a personal story, that the teller changed the story. The story was not about I, it was about we. Personal stories do that. We are all there, and we have all experienced something. And so they have the potential to be very powerful. So, well, if you would like to tell a personal story, we have room. We have room.
Yes, we do.
Okay, Sharon.
That's an interesting question.
Mm.
I have envied the people that have imagination and can pluck stories, but it doesn't happen with me. And I remember one time I saw a story that I just loved about two Alaskan women that got left behind by their tribe because they were too old to work anymore, the two women.
Yeah,
and I spent a year trying to get that story together. And finally, Elaine said to me, maybe it's just not your story. Maybe it doesn't, it doesn't belong to you. You can enjoy it, but don't try and tell. And when I started thinking about what is my story, I realized that I'm not only not good at imagination, I'm not good at fiction, period. I only want to tell about and to write about things that really happened to me or to somebody else. And when I try to do that, there's something in my brain that goes, no, that didn't happen. That's not real. You're not telling it like it really was. And so I'm kind of stuck with the facts there, but that's my lane. Is just
Oh,
personal stories. And
yeah.
somebody said, what you do is making something out of nothing, which I thought, well, that's not the worst thing. I'm happy with that.
But you take us on, it's like watching a movie, because what a cinematographer does is they close in on something and then they pull back and then they move here, and you take us on your journey of the green hair and the movement with the cigarettes, and it's like watching a cinematographer do their work. So it's very creative in that.
Well, there's nothing in your work that is like watching a cinematographer. It's more like moving into a whole nother planet, and I think, how does she do that? How does it come to her that the fish are floating past the window? I don't know.
Well, if it's any consolation, I have tried to tell a personal story, and I honestly thought everybody listening had just died. I mean, there was no facial expression whatsoever, and when I was over, I had to tell them it was over. Yeah. So I don't do personal stories for that reason. So we've each got our gifts. So Kay, I don't know if you want to join in, but do you like? Yeah, please do tell us.
Yes, I thank you guys for giving me the opportunity to hear actual tellers. I am not. And I would love to respond to something that Katie said, because I had the opportunity to hear one of her stories in Tahoe with a small group of close friends. And I want to speak to how she said that she incorporates weather, or weather is often influence her stories. Well, she was telling this delightful story in Tahoe, and there was thunder in the story, and suddenly there was thunder outside. It was like as if on cue. It was really something. And I too am not that creative, so I don't I don't feel like I have the imagination and storytelling. My creative abilities have different avenues. Storytelling's not one, but I too would be a nonfiction teller to friends, and often stories that might shorten the learning curve, as I'm 74 and some friends are younger. Who knows what they might be going through, and in hopes of sharing something from my experience that could support someone else, and also sharing stories of my elders that they shared with me, and using it as connection, and the joy of reminiscing with other family members about those who have passed, and yet their story lives on. And I think that that's where I come from, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, and something I was going to say too that I loved about the Hawaiian culture, when they're speaking to each other, they call it talking story.
Yes.
Mhm.
They do. Yes. Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I think the distinction between fiction and nonfiction, the whole thing is that every human that listens to a story, you feel less alone. There, I read this Franklin Roosevelt quote that said something to the effect of, "We are all part of each other." And it's
Mm.
true. When you hear stories, whether they're folk tales or whatever, there's a connection, because we know in our heart where we get it. So
Something resonates, and that is a beautiful connection.
it's important.
Thank you.
So I guess I'm the last one. And basically, I'm sort of like Katie. I told a lot of stories when I was a kid. We lived out in boondocks, and every single child we had one street, and every single one of them was a boy. And so I didn't want to play war games and stuff. My father had three 78 RPM records, which some of you may know what those are. And it was Grieg and his piano concerto. And I would sit and listen to it and rock in a rocking chair. and I would tell myself stories to it.
Hmm.
And so I love telling stories to music, because to me, every composer is telling a story, and you can just let it expand in your mind. And that's what's so magical. That's why I love music as inspiration, because it was when I was a child. So
Mhm.
anyway, thank you
Wow.
guys. Our story sources are as varied as our stories, not surprisingly. Before we go back into storytelling, though, we do have Meg, we do have a couple of announcements. Yes.
Yes, we do. Okay. Actually, they're pretty quick today. I just want to remind you that the genre storytelling is happening on the 21st, which is that a Saturday? Might be. Anyway,
No,
it's on
21st
the,
is Wednesday.
oh, sorry, right, Wednesday. They always do theirs on Wednesday. So it's a February 21st, so a week from tomorrow. They're romantic and love stories in honor, I'm sure, of February's great holiday. 7 to 8:30. If you are a SAC member, free. So become a fat SAC member if you're not, because there's lots of benefits, and that's one of them. Otherwise, it's $5, which is reasonable. But I think some of you guys have done the genre, and I think that it's just a really wonderful venue for listening to some really great stories. So that's a good thing. And then I just want to remind everybody, because it's going to be coming up fast, that on May 3rd and 4th, the Bay Area Storytelling Festival will be here in Santa Rosa. And I think Katie was mentioning earlier that Vicki and myself and Katie are speaking with Sarah Armstrong with SAC to see how we can help them out. And we may be needing some volunteers, so we'll keep you posted on that. Still a couple months away, so we have some time, but that's something to put on your calendar. And then on March 9th, that comes up more quickly, next month, will be the SAC Annual Membership and Regional Gem Award. And that's a really interesting and fun event. Jean Ellison is the SAC's 2024 honoree, and she's a fabulous teller. You can get a lot of information about this on the SAC website, so check it out. It'll tell you who Jean is and what she's done, and I think it would be fabulous. It is streamed or it's live, so you can go and participate live, or you can watch it streamed. But always a wonderful annual event that SAC puts together. And so that's pretty much the announcements, I think, for today. Anything else I missed, Katie?
Can I add? Do
Mhm.
we want to float? We are floating the idea of having something called office hours,
Oh, thank you.
which is what we would be doing is actually meeting on Zoom, and we would send out a link. If you are interested in just practicing a story, we will not record it. We will not laugh at you. We will not say terrible things behind your back. You can just practice. And Meg, Brandon, Katie, me, whoever will be there and to listen and to give you feedback if you would like it. And it's going to be incredibly non-threatening. So, and that would
So
be
that
the first Tuesday before our meet. So, for example, we're meeting on the 13th. We would be offering it at exactly this time, if I'm not mistaken, on the Tuesday before. So, for example, in February, it would have been on February 6th. And so in March, it will be March 5th, for example. And we will send out a little invitation if anybody is interested. Am I correct in this? I hope I am.
yes. And I'll go ahead, Vicki, and put together an email with the link before the March 5th, just kind of right before, probably the Friday before Monday. And so that it will be right on the computer. You'll just be able to go into your email and click on it and get right over to the office hours.
The office hours, we're calling it that because that's what Brandon.
Yes.
Yes.
Right. Good. Thank you. I forgot about that. Thanks, Vicki.
Any other announcements? Anybody doing? Okay. Well, then I guess we will go back to our storytelling. And you get to see a giant me again. Yahoo! Here I am. So I'm the next storyteller. And I'm going to tell you a story that's going to sound somewhat like Katie's, but it's not. So, Abner had a bunch of talking rocks in his garden. Actually, they were mumblers. They mumbled, they giggled, they mumbled, and he'd listen to them. He'd pick up another one and they mumbled. He couldn't understand a word they were saying. Mumbling, mumbling, giggle, mumble, mumble. Well, Abner, being newly retired, figured, fine, I have better things to do than sit around listening to rocks. He wanted to read War and Peace. He wanted to walk the entire Meadowwood Trail. Yes, He wanted to learn how to make a really good marinara sauce, and he wanted to take naps whenever he felt like it. Way too busy to sit around listening to rocks. Thank you very much. Well, time went on, and summer rolled in, and one miserable August afternoon, Abner was sitting in his living room being assaulted by 50,000 pounds of humidity and heat in his living room until he could stand it no more. He got up, went into his kitchen, and got his Tupperware bowl and headed off down the sidewalk in the blinding hot white sun for blackberries, because you see, August is blackberry season. And so down he went to the forgotten lot with all the scratchy weeds. And he started wading in, and the burrs were sticking to his socks in his sandals and pulling at his cargo shorts, and big clouds of gnats wove in and out. And oh, it was miserable, but off in the very far distance, he could see it, the black shadows of the blackberry bushes. And he strode forward, and suddenly, damn it, he looked down. He had slammed his foot into a rock, and it hurt. And then he heard, well, damn it yourself. And he looked down. Did you say something? He said to the rock. And the rock said, well, yes, you kicked me. Oh my gosh. Oh my. And he threw away his Tupperware bowl and knelt down next to the rock and said, wait, listen, I have mumbling rocks in my property, and I've never actually heard a talking rock. And the rock said, well, that's fine. I've never actually met a human that listens, so I guess we're even. Said Abner, listen, would you mind if I moved you into my garden so that you could tell me what my mumblers are saying? I can't hear them. Would you mind if you were moved? Well, this started the rock musing. Yeah, well, we rocks, we move all the time, we do. Why, once I was branch and bark and fur and flesh, and I've been a rock for a long time. I suppose one day I'm going to be gravel, and then I'm going to be dirt, and maybe I'll raise up a tree or two of my own. Yes, yes, you humans, you don't understand. Everything's moving. Everything you see is going somewhere, coming from somewhere. Yes, you humans, you have the lifespan of a fruit fly. You wouldn't understand this, but who you are now is not who you will be. No, indeed, 100 years from now, yeah, son, you might be a clamshell. I don't know. Yeah, and we're all moving, so I don't care. Go ahead and move me. Well, Abner went and got his wheelbarrow and came rolling back and picked up the rock and put it into the wheelbarrow and rolled down the street back to his house. And he put it into his garden right in the middle of all those mumblers. And every morning he would come out with his folding aluminum yard chair there, and he'd sit it And just at that one slip of summer mornings where there is actually dew on the grass and the sky is roseate before the sun actually comes up and the birds are crazy and the air is blessedly cool, that's when Abner would sit with his cup of coffee and he and the rock would talk, you see. And they'd have wonderful conversations about attachment and about what lasts and what doesn't. And oh, by the way, it turned out the mumblers were nothing but a bunch of malicious gossips. All lies anyway, nothing to listen to. Well, Abner was very happy. He had a friend in this rock. But then the seasons changed and a cool breeze of autumn started to kick up in the afternoons and the leaves started turning color. And there was a chill in the air that just invited him to get up and walk down the street, to go walk and walk and walk. And so that's what he did. So he went past the warden's house with the mean dog, and then he went past the Johnson's house, the house oh broken toys, dump, a dump. Really, that's what he saw. And then there was Crazy Edna's house. It was an old Victorian, ramshackle, and it seemed to be kind of leaning just a little bit. And Crazy Edna, see, she got her name because she sat in the back of her yard right under 3 enormous old evergreen trees. There were always 2 chairs and a table, like Edna was expecting someone to come. Well, nobody ever came. It was just Edna sitting out there in all weather. I mean, sometimes with an umbrella up, you know? Edna just sitting there by herself, nothing on the table, nobody to talk to. And that's when Abner looked a little closer. Why, her lips were moving. She was talking to trees. She was talking to trees. Well, without being invited, Abner strode right across the yard and into the backyard and stood right in front of her and said, "Edna McCormick, are you talking to trees?" Oh, she fluttered and flapped like a cornered chicken. Oh, who are you? Oh. And then she settled back into herself. And she looked at him with an unblinking eye and said, "Yes, I am, Abner. What of it?" Abner looked around and he said quietly, "Well, I talk to rocks." Oh, she said, "Wait, you sit down, Abner. I'm going to make some tea." And with that, she got up and scuttled into the kitchen. So Abner sat down in one of the rickety little chairs and he looked at the enormous trunks of the trees, some of them clothed in beautiful velvety moss, up into the bowers of the branches, the squirrels scurrying, blue chips of sky showing through. Oh, they were magnificent trees. And presently here came Edna, rattling her tea tray, which she put down on the table, 2 little bone china cups and a pot with steam rising up out of it, like a song or like a genie out of a magic lamp. And of course, some semi-stale Girl Scout cookies. And so they sat in the shade and they munched on their cookies and they talked. And he told her about what the rock had told him about letting go of your attachments, letting go of who you think you are, because you won't be that tomorrow. You'll be something else entirely tomorrow. And then he asked her what she heard from the trees. And she said, "Oh, well, the trees, why, I don't bother with saplings. They don't know anything. But these trees, why, all they do, they exist to reach toward the light. And it's not because they think they can grab the light or possess the light. It's because they long for it so. And they grow. As long as they live, they grow. And even when they topple over, more branches grow out of the fallen branches. And all they do is long toward the light. And the higher they reach to the light, the deeper their roots get. Oh, they teach me about patience and about hope and about faith and endurance. I learned so much from them." Well, they had a lovely tea and they became fast friends. And you could see them frequently. Why they would get their walking sticks and they would walk the Meadowwood Trail, or they would walk around the park together. But frequently they would find a place to sit and just be with the water lapping up from a lake, or bees buzzing or whatever. And what was interesting is you could tell they were really close friends, but they didn't chatter like most people do. They seemed to spend most of their time just listening. The end. So I am going to, all right, I know how to do this. I'm going to remove the spotlight. Yes, here we go. And we have one storyteller left. Yay, Elaine. And hold on, I'm going to, I'm sorry, it just takes me so, if I put my glasses on, I could figure this out.
Mhm.
All right, wait, stop, spotlight for everyone. There we go. Okay, girlfriend, you are on.
You know how if you listen to a lot of storytellers or go to festivals, they very often the storyteller will start by saying, now, this is a true story. I mean, really, this is a true story. And so I need to preface that this is a true story, or at least it's as true as any tall tale I ever heard before. You see, I was born in Virginia, and I left when I was 3 months old. Oh, not on my own. It was with the family. As my father was in the Air Force, and I grew up an Air Force brat, moving on average every 2 years. I started school in England, Newmarket, England, about an hour out of London. And I finished school, graduated from high school in Tokyo, Japan, going to an American government high school. And that summer after my graduation, the Air Force sent my father back to his next assignment. So the whole family got to travel on the ships that were sailing over to Japan at the time, the fancy ships that people take their vacations on. We get to take one of those ships back to California. Well, it was a wonderful experience and I learned a lot. But the most exciting thing that happened to me on that ship trip was that I had my 20th birthday on the day we crossed the international date line, which means I actually had my 20th birthday twice, 2 days in a row, which might make me 20 years older than I am right now. Anyway, we got back to California. We came into San Francisco, docked in San Francisco, and his assignment was in Southern California. So we went to the hotel, got our things together, and we were going to be heading south the next day. And I got my father aside and said, I'm not ready to punch a time card or go to college. I want to find myself. And he said, you found yourself. You're standing right in front of me. I can see you. You're fine. And I said, no, 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 no. I mean, when you meet people, they say, where are you from? I never know if I'm supposed to say I'm from where I was born or I'm from where I just last lived. And he said, mm-hmm. And I said, if I went back to Virginia, I didn't know what my birth state even looked like. I don't remember it being a baby when we moved away. And he said, all right, I tell you what, I'll give you your inheritance now, but don't come to me for money again. You get a job or however else you earn your money, but I will not be giving you more money. We'd love to hear from you. Come home for holidays, but I'll how do you feel about that? I said, well, that'll be terrific. I could then know what my birth state looks like. And then I could say I'm from Virginia. I know what Virginia is. He said, whatever makes you happy, whatever floats your boat. So he gave me a sizable chunk of money. And then my brain went crazy. Just, it was like, oh, what's the cheapest way I can get back to Virginia and still have money to live on? Well, I figured out the Greyhound bus was probably the cheapest way. So I took a Greyhound bus, and it felt like it took 10 years because all it did was start and stop, start and stop. We'd stop to eat. We'd stop to go to the bathroom, even though they had one of those bathrooms in the back of the bus. And people changed, and I was still on the bus. Pretty soon, I didn't recognize anybody else on the bus because they continually changed. And we finally got to Virginia. Well, it is a beautiful state. Blue Ridge Mountains running down the western side of the state. And I hiked up in the Blue Ridge Mountains and I went, if I bought a place up here with my money, I could live off the land. I would never have to punch a time. I would never have to go to college. I would be self-sufficient. And so I went into town and I looked for a realtor who would not laugh me out of the office. And I found a woman who was very seriously going to help me find a place I could afford to buy. So we went up in the mountains, and since she had a car, we were really covering more ground than I could hiking. And we found a cabin. Oh, it was old and it looked like it would keep the rain out. It did keep most of the rain out when it rained, but it was perfect. It was a stone fireplace. I just went, oh, this is it. This is perfect. It was little, but I could live there, no sweat. So I bought the house, the cabin, and I went into town and I bought supplies I would need for hunting, supplies I would need for fishing, and supplies I would need for gardening. I found somebody who would drive me and all my supplies out to the cabin. Got settled, and then first I decided got to start the garden. Well, gardening is not easy work. In fact, it's pretty hard work. And when you don't know what you're doing, the animals are eating more out of the garden than you are. In fact, I got very little food out of the garden at all until I learned you have to put wire down to keep them from coming up and eating the roots. You have to wire off the fence so the deer and their bigger animals don't come in and eat the leafy growing things. It took me a good year and a half to grow a decent garden that I was actually bringing in food from the garden that I could eat. I was working on my fishing skills and my hunting skills because I'd never done any of that before. And it probably took me 2 years to really learn how to fish so that I knew at the time of the year or time of the day where the fish were running and what bait was the best for catching certain types of fish. But freshwater fish are pretty good. And I could get a freezer full once I knew where the fish were running. And it took me 2.5 years to really learn how to hunt so that when I went out, I would catch something that I could bring home for meat on the table. And life was going along pretty good after a few years. And it was still hard work, but it was done when I wanted to do it, as long as I wasn't too lazy about it.
Mhm.
Well, one fall morning, beautiful fall morning, I realized I hadn't had any meat on the table for a while. So I grabbed my gun from the stone fireplace where it hung, and I threw it over my shoulder, and I swung open the front door and walked down the trail. It was gorgeous. The sun was shining through the changing colored leaves, yellow, red, orange, like sun through a cathedral window. And I was humming to myself because it was so beautiful and so delightful. And you can't hunt when you're making noise humming. So when I realized that I was walking, hiking miles, I went, time to hunt. So I stopped humming, stopped singing, and started walking down the path, so stealth-like you could not hear a leaf or twig crack beneath my big old hunkin' hiking boots.
Mhm.
I was moving like the wind. I was one with the woods. It was amazing. I looked to my right and I saw a deer with a rack of antlers like I'd never seen before. It was a 26-point rack. It was amazing. I don't know how the deer even could hold his head up off the ground. It was so beautiful.
Mhm.
Just as I pulled my gun up and I took a bead on that deer, I heard a sound off to my right. I looked through the woods and there come a black bear. Oh, I looked at the bear and the deer and the deer and the bear, and it didn't seem right to leave either one. So I pulled a knife out of my hunting belt and I threw it at an elm tree right between the two. I took aim at that knife blade and I shot. Bam! That bullet hit the blade and split right in two, one half killing the deer and the other half killing the bear. Oh, I couldn't believe my luck. I was so ecstatic. I went running over to check my deer when I tripped over a turtle and fell head first into the creek. I came up sputtering and spitting water, and I looked over and the turtle was on his back, and it's a good thing because turtle soup in the fall is so good. So I started to get out of the creek. Well, it took me a good 20 to 30 minutes to get out of the creek because my boots were so full of trout. And I started packing up and tying up and gathering up everything I had caught. And, you know, it weren't a bad day's catch for only having one bullet left. It's called One Bullet Left. It's an old Ozark tall tale. I left out a few pieces of the story. That's why I'm doing it. I'll probably do it again soon so I can get the whole story clear and smooth again. But the hardest part I had telling this tale is how do you start? Because it's got to be my story. And
Right.
so I built the first part, a personal story, true personal story about where I went to school and having my 20th birthday on the ship coming back.
You know, that's one of the things I was going to say about tall tales. That's another story I can't tell, but you did a fabulous job. It's that it starts off with everything is believable, and then it gets a little bit bigger.
That's
Well,
right.
maybe you still believe that. Well, maybe it gets a little bit, well, all right, that could possibly, and it takes quite a while until you realize you have been totally bamboozled.
That's right. I actually told this story somewhere where somebody came up to me angry that I fooled them. And I said, I did say it's as true as any tall tale I ever heard before. Because he said, you said it was a true story. And then he was mad because I bamboozled him. And it was like, well, I told you it was as true as any tall tale I ever heard before. And he goes, oh, yeah, you did.
Yeah. I remember reading where that the tall tale is indigenous to America because the people came from Europe and settled in the 1600s and 1700s, and word would go back to Europe, and they would, because they wanted to tell people in Europe just how wonderful where they was, that they'd start to embellish, and then they'd embellish a little more, and then it, you know, and the stories became big, and you've got, you know, Paul Bunyan and all these stories that got bigger and bigger, and Pecos Bill and all those stories that came from Americans feeling that America, anything could happen. And so why couldn't it happen to them? Sure, why not? So, yeah.
Well, thank you.
Well, thank you guys all. I'm gonna just do, I'm sorry, I'm doing my thing here, remove spotlight, and I'm gonna remove my spotlight if I can. Remove spotlight. Yes, okay, here we are back again. I was just looking that we had folk tales, we had personal stories, we had love stories, we had fantasy, and we had tall tales. So I think we covered every single genre. So I'm just saying, we did good, people. Yes, we did. So I think that's about it for tonight. And hopefully we will send out an email asking if any of you would like to try a story during office hours. And I do hope to see you guys in March.
Thank you, Vicky.
Thank you, Vicky. Great job, Vicky and Katie.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for your
Fabulous.
stories, all of you other tellers. Yeah.
This is a
And
better
great
Valentine's than anything I could have.
And thanks
Great
for
stories today, you guys. Really wonderful. Thank you.
Yes, they are. Thank you.
Do
All
the
right.
cats actually get in all the recordings?
He is now. He is now. Yes, indeed.
Okay.
camera.